Welcome to the Speak with People podcast, where we believe that healthy communication is the key to unlocking your leadership potential. We are the go-to resource for leaders looking to greatly improve their communication skills, whether it's one-on-one interactions, team settings, public speaking, or digital communication. By improving these skills, leaders can create stronger connections and drive positive change within their organizations. Each and every episode, we sit down with experts from various fields from around the world, just like you're grabbing a coffee with them, to dive into real practical conversations. Our goal is to help you transform your communication skills so you can lead more effectively, build stronger relationships, and make a lasting impact. So go grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's learn together. Well, how do you know if your team is truly aligned or just compliant? So often that's kind of the problem with a lot of our organizations. Most leaders assume everything is fine until it's not. Behind the scenes, there's unclear communication, misaligned values, and leadership silence just quietly erodes trust. Well, today's guest is here to help us dive into that problem. And I am excited. It is someone that I've been learning from afar. Been very excited to have this interview because she is an expert in the field of communication. And I absolutely love to learn from other people who are spearheading opportunities to bring teams together and learn how to communicate. She's a veteran communication strategist. She's a former big law leader, founder of Ready Cultures. She helps organizations turn their workforce into their biggest differentiator by building cultures that are as strong in practice as they are on paper. Alejandra Ramirez, welcome to the Speak with People podcast.
Hello, hello. It's great to be here.
It is very exciting to have you. And like we talked about off camera, bring our listeners into it a little bit more. I made a joke because you are up in the north of our country about snow, and there is no longer snow in your neck of the woods.
Thank God for that. I'm so ready for summer. I'm being from Miami. I crave the sun. So
Yes, yes, and it is. I mean, summer is like we talked about before. In the north, summer is amazing. I could see
it
why.
really is. The lots of outdoors, lots of hiking, lots of opportunity to get out. So I'm excited for this year.
Absolutely. Well, hey, before we hop in, why don't you give us just a little bit more of our story? Not our story, your story. Our
Well, our
story is,
story goes way back to a
yes.
few months. Um, So my story, well, I guess I'll start with a little bit about my childhood because it's completely relevant. I'm not going to take you through all of my childhood years, but I do like to talk about the fact that I'm what's called a third culture kid, which
Hmm.
essentially means I was born in Colombia. I was raised by a mom who is Colombian and a very Latin American culture, also a white American stepdad. Very different cultures. I grew up translating a lot of things in my family, not
Wow.
language barriers, but just cultural barriers. And I learned I kind of had a foot in both. And I think that really set the stage for just how I move through the world. Um, and I've always been a very curious person. I love to ask why a lot. That's something that my family always jokes about when I was little. I was always like, but why? But why? But why? And so, over the years, I thought I'd maybe wanted to be a journalist. I thought maybe I'd go into it was always something related to writing or communication. And I was lucky enough to land at a law firm early in my career, had a phenomenal boss, and just sort of grew through the ranks. I was the director of communications at a few law firms and got the chance to work in the space I essentially love. And I fell into it a little by accident, but ultimately realized it was the right fit for me. And now I run Ready Cultures. So a couple years ago, I decided to go off on my own and work with companies on their internal communications strategy and figure out how they can make sure that it's not an afterthought, which a lot of companies do, when in fact your employees are your biggest differentiator, right? So that brings us to today.
Wow. Wow. Well, we could spend the entire time. I've got questions about, so many things that you already brought up. But I do want to say this first. Do you think it's on purpose that companies just lose sight of the fact of how important their communication culture is because they're just moving and achieving and, is it just something that just happens? Yeah, I'm just always curious, why is there not more
Yes.
of a focus on it?
I mean, look, I think very few people ever come to anything out of evil. But I do think it's on accident. I think that it's easy as a leader to assume people see things the way you do and can read your mind, and therefore, if you're moving fast or if you know sort of your vision, you just assume everyone is going to keep up. So I do see that a lot, and I don't think it's intentional. Um, some people are bad just at their core, and I've seen and have worked with people like that, and that's never going to change, unfortunately. But for the ones who genuinely care and just need more guidance, that's what I'm here to help do.
Wow. Well, I know our entrepreneurs and our people, starters who are listening probably have a whole line of questions. But I'll just ask you one. We'll hop into the conversation. But in you went from probably lots of structure, uh, law offices, lots of security. So that leap for
Mhm.
you to launching out on your own, was it crazy? Did you wake up in cold sweats? Was it exhilarating? Would love to know.
I would say a little bit of everything. Look, I mean, any job is fun and any job is difficult, and I would say it's hard in different ways. Running your own business, you're sort of setting your own schedule. You're trying to figure out what works, and I had days where I'd be sitting at my computer being like, "Oh wait, I make the rules now. I should probably figure out what the rules are." Right? So, it's a little bit of both. And I mean, I'm on year two. So far, so good. I always tell myself every few months I check in and see if it still aligns with what I want to do. And I'm enjoying it and I'm enjoying what I do. So, for anyone listening who's in that space, keep going and trust your gut.
Ah, it's amazing. That's amazing. I love that. So, you've kind of seen the culture communication gap firsthand. What are some of the common symptoms that leaders seem to miss when it comes to that gap?
So, one of the I love this question because one of the biggest things I see is that leaders often assume that saying something once means it's understood and believed, right?
Yes.
And employees don't operate on what leaders say, they operate on what they see and feel as well. And so you need to say things, but also follow through with it, and how you act on it. And
Wow.
also repeat. Because if you think about marketing, sort of aside from comms, and you think about marketing, people make decisions on their emotional sort of limbic system, and they need constant reminders before they choose to buy whatever said thing is, right? It takes, I think, 7 touch points. I don't remember what the rule is. Um, the same applies to communication. If you want them to act on something, you need to be able to consistently remind them of said thing. And so that to me is the biggest one. They're like, well, and I've had clients, and even when I worked in house, I had people tell me, well, I don't understand. I sent an email. It's like, okay, but so what? It's one
Right.
email, and it probably didn't really say a whole lot, which we can potentially cover later. There's a science to how you communicate as well, and apply certain um, you know, think about certain questions you want to answer. Otherwise, you're not really, what's the point of sending an email, right?
Right. Or the email was so long that, nobody
Oh my
could get
gosh,
to any
yes.
of it.
Well, and everyone's on their phone these days, right? So I think the rule is three scrolls and you've lost them. So when you're writing something, think about that any longer and you're not going to get very far.
Wow. Three scrolls. Especially as we talk about this culture of communication, what do you see as you work with companies, especially around, our Gen Zers who,
Mhm.
are digital natives? They like things quick. They want a reply pretty quick. Then you got the millennials, then you got the Gen X, and then you got boomers. What are you seeing, with some of the either the good positive things coming from it or the negatives as they're trying to figure out, that those gaps that exist there.
You know, I I think it's important in communication to know your audience.
Hmm.
And those gaps are going to be different. So, sure, yes, you have these broad strokes descriptions of these different generations, but even within that, you've got people, everyone's unique and everyone understands information differently. absorbs information differently, and everyone brings something to the table. I'm a big believer in working together. And so each generation, I think, has its pros and its cons. I will say younger generations tend to be very big on values alignment, right? They
Mm.
if it doesn't match what they think is the right thing to do, for example, it's probably not going to be someone who's going to stay at the company for long. And by the way, I think that's okay if you're communicating clearly and explaining expectations
Yeah.
and people are leaving, so long as it's the people that maybe aren't the right fit, you're good. Um, but ultimately, yeah, I mean, I guess to answer your question, it's every generation has pros and cons, and the key is knowing how to communicate with each of those.
I love it. I I think back to the Office episode where Ryan got the promotion and he brings in blackberries for the first time, and Michael Scott's just he has no idea what to do. You
That's
know,
such a great episode. That's such a great show. I regret. So I think I've watched it once all the way through, and every so often I'll pick random episodes, but I feel like I should watch it again because it's just so funny. And the memes that come from that, I see so many memes online from that because they're just so relatable. In
you
fact,
should definitely watch it again.
yeah, I agree. I agree.
I love that. Okay, so sorry to go from the office to now, a big shift, but you talk a lot about the 3H communication framework. This really does help build trust, and so much of communication is trust. That's why sometimes leaders we get it wrong because we take out the trust part and we're just informing and dumping and spewing stuff. So walk us through that 3H framework, to really see, okay, hey, how can this help us improve, build trust with how we communicate?
Mhm. So the 3H framework is built on the broader communications concept, which is think, feel, do. So think, feel, do is essentially when you're sending a message, you always want to think about what do you want your readers to think, what do you want them to feel, and what do you want them to do. I call my framework the 3H framework because it feels more human to me and it's easier to remember in my head. And essentially really focuses it entirely on the internal comms piece, which is when you're delivering a message, whether it's via email, whether it's at a town hall in person, or whatever it may be, one to one or one to a many, um, it's called head, heart, hands. So the 3H stands for head, heart, hands. And what it is you want to make sure that you're answering the head, the heart, and the hands, the head being the logic and the clarity, right? So you're sending something out. What are the facts that you want to get across? Let's say you're rolling out a new tool at your company. Okay, here's what the tool is, here's what it does, here's when it's going to go live, right? That's just basic facts. Then there's the heart. And this part people don't often get right. And this is the what's in it for me? Why should I care? Why does this matter? And it's that sort of emotional awareness and connection. And that's really important because people want to feel a part of something and they want to feel like they are going to like it's going to benefit them. I mean, it's human nature, but people crave connection. And using the example of the tool rollout, it could be as simple as saying, we're doing this because we heard from many of you and you said that the current system just doesn't work and you waste a lot of time and we heard you and we took that feedback and we found a new tool that's going to save you time and you're going to just be so much better for it. I mean,
Mm,
think about receiving an email like that. If you're one of the people who gave that feedback, it's going
right.
to resonate that much more. And then you've got the hands, which is the actions and behaviors that you want to for people to do. I always say that what I do is help companies change how people work by connecting the dots between what leaders are saying and what employees are hearing and doing. And the
Mm,
hands is that piece of it because going back to this tool example, and I've done this, I've worked with a company who did roll out a tool that it was an onboarding tool. And the hands is okay, what do you want them to do with this information? Do you just like, hey, heads up, here's this new tool that's not going to mean anything to anyone? It could be as simple as we have some training sessions that we need you to join before the tool launches. Here's the deadline. Please sign up at this link, and here's a link to some FAQs. It doesn't have to be an essay. It doesn't have to be the entire plan for the next 6 months because again, you don't send one email, you send many. So you have opportunities to adjust and change that. So the 3H framework to me is really important. And if you can get that right at a minimum, you're doing your job well.
Wow, absolutely. I mean, even just to think through, okay, before I communicate something, make sure that's kind of forefront. That would help out so much because it's so interesting. Sometimes we could alleviate so much pain or so much confusion with just a little bit of strategery. I don't know if that's really a
Yeah,
word, but it's just something
it
else.
is. I mean, I, to me, strategy at its core is explaining how you're going to do the thing that you want to do. And strategy, I think, has become this amorphous word that doesn't really result in anything. And to me, the internal comms piece is a key part of that strategy because it's what communicates and connects dots. It breaks down silos and it just gets people moving in a way that I think so many forget needs to happen to actually take that thought and idea and turn it into an actual result and deliverable.
Yeah, information is power. I just
Yeah.
said that out loud. Even if you look at the org chart, I made the weird face because I was like, okay, is it? It really is. Like if you feel in the know, now you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
I know.
Feeling in the know, people crave connection, and information is a part of that.
I love that people crave connection. So okay, so talk to us about like a maybe of a more corporate structure org chart. Leaders can't they can't making sure everyone's in the know all of the time, especially one-on-one, sidebar conversations. But if they do think through little moments of communication along, all of those different levels, powerful things can happen. So walk us through maybe some specific examples of, different connection pieces in more of a, corporate setting, where, maybe the tool thing where you're rolling something out.
So I always like to say that it's important to know who's making the decisions and who is
Mm,
acting on them. That's really important, right? I'll give an example of something that involves crisis communication, business continuity planning. That's something that a lot of businesses also think of as an afterthought. And at the end of the day, communication is what makes sure it's working. And whatever the scenario, and I know I'm talking corporate here, but it does really apply to any company that wants to get it right and be successful and grow their bottom line. And that is defining, it's what I call the communications waterfall. And it's defining who sends what, when, and how, right?
mm,
So in crisis communication, I worked with a client who was trying to figure out how to communicate with different types of crises. And we mapped out the types of crises. But then we also identified, okay, if this scenario happens, who decides that it is a crisis, A, and that something needs to be sent and that it sort of triggers whatever it needs to trigger? Is it the CEO? Great. Then let's say the CEO is the one responsible for this and write it out. What happens if the CEO is on a plane when this happens and can't, that who's sort of that second in command? And mapping out these different um, criteria is so essential. And it doesn't, by the way, I'm using crisis comms as an example. It can be any type of communication because at the end of the day, people want consistency. So I'll
mm.
give you another example. I when I still worked in house, one of the first things I did at one of the law firms I worked at was to define who was sending information when and how. So you had information about new hires, you had information about new systems that were in place, you had information of just regular company updates and town halls. And every single time it was sent by someone different. And it created a lot of confusion. And so I worked with the executive team to say, okay, we know that any emails that come from the chair are going to be specific to big firm updates, whether it's you're bringing on a new partner or you're opening a new office, or maybe there's a more human element you want to add, maybe the the CEO wants to send a monthly email about things going on, right? Versus it's an event about, you know, whatever skill set that you want to, it's a professional development. That should maybe come from someone in HR. And so we mapped all that out, and it made it so much easier to then plan for and draft messaging because
Mm,
we were clear on who it was. And not just that, but each person's voice is different. So it helped us better create that more human element to the communication we were helping strategize on.
absolutely. I mean, it's just so powerful, and it's amazing. Taking that time probably paid off in dividends down the road.
Oh yeah, it's as much as it, leaders sometimes panic, and this happens with external comms too. PR, you tell someone you're going to be interviewed, and it's deer in the headlights. Like, what do I say? Same concept applies internally. People get really panicked about like, well, what are people going to say? What are they going to think? And at the end of the day, there are certain things you can sort of plan for ahead of time if you just talk through it and map it out. So I think it's really important if you haven't noticed because it's what I do.
Absolutely. And what's just crazy to me sometimes is so many bumps in the road for a company can be pointed right back to a lack of communication in their culture. Productivity, I mean, two employees, they get into it a little bit. This person stops talking. This person stops talking, and then especially if they work in an office together, then everybody feels the tension, and then everybody's
Mhm,
productivity goes down because one person's like, "Well, I
mhm.
don't want to walk over there because they'll see me walking over there." I mean, it happens. It's like, this is crazy, and, finally somebody says, "Well, you gotta work this out," I mean, productivity, morale, vision, sales,
Right.
everything can come to a screeching halt if that communication does not flow. How do you break the culture if your people say, "Well, we never know what's going on around here." That could be true, it could be not. There's always gonna be those negative naysayers who, maybe they're not in the know. So, but, for for the majority of people, how would you respond, or what would you say to, trying to improve a culture where your employees are like, don't ever know what's going on. We just find out day to day. What are some immediate steps that manager could take?
So many thoughts to that. Okay, so I would say, assuming there is an issue, let's start with that. Assuming there is an issue, I would say you need to work on rebuilding trust. And you need to rebuild trust how? You want to start with acknowledgement, right? Sometimes leaders want to move on and, you know, the moment has passed or whatever, but you want to start with acknowledgement. But in your case, in your scenario where you're saying, yeah, there's always the naysayers, but the general consensus is nothing, we don't ever find out. I would say think about feedback and start by listening, right? Instead of just saying, well, that's not true, ask why they think that. Ask what could be done differently. The more questions you ask, the more clarity you're going to get as a leader to then better communicate if, in fact, it's true. Because, yes, there are always going to be naysayers, but if it's what you are hearing fairly consistently, then clearly something is wrong. And
Mm,
in my opinion, you want to start with listening and making sure that you're understanding where this is coming from. Because too often, also, leaders think communication is this one way thing.
right.
Like, oh, here's a message, I've delivered it to you. It's a two-way communication. And that is part of getting it right. And you're scaling your business and you're growing significantly, you need to scale your communication to grow with that scaling of the business.
Wow. There's nothing worse. I worked for a very toxic organization before I started to speak with people. And there's nothing worse than sitting in a meeting, especially when you're supposed to be the one running the meeting, where you find out things in the meeting from other people that, you should have known first just because of, chain of command and how the org chart. I mean, there's
Mhm.
just, there's nothing that can destroy trust like that kind of break in communication. It's just amazing.
Way, that's a good example of communication is about words and actions, and they need to match. You can't say one thing and do another. So if you claim that collaboration is a value that the company, is all about. But then you reward the people who are the solo contributors and do their own solo thing.
Yep.
It's not really going to match. If you value transparency, but then don't answer the tough questions at the town hall, not great either, right? So all of those things matter.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's it. So I could be way off here. I imagine working for a law firm, like an episode of Suits, and so not Suits LA, because, but like the original Suits. And some of my misconceptions from watching that is, in order to work in a law firm, you have to have very thick skin because everybody is just yelling at each other, and it's just cutthroat. Is that is that is that untrue? Is there parts of that's true? At what point do leaders have to kind of develop some more thick skin, especially in more high stakes environments?
Well, so I would say that Suits has better dressed characters than law firms. They're very they're very sharply dressed on Suits. Kidding, of course. Look, I think law firms tend to lean more formal and hierarchical, right? They're more cautious, they're risk averse, they're lawyers.
Yes.
Um, and it's akin to working, in my opinion. I've never worked with engineers directly, but I imagine it's the same thing. Engineers are very technically savvy in what they're technically savvy in. Same thing with lawyers. Lawyers practice law, they are very good at the law. That doesn't make them good at communicating. That's not to say there aren't any that, again, everyone has skills, everyone has communication skills, or they don't. And I think big law often tends to be very hierarchical. Messages travel top down and very carefully, whereas some more fast-paced companies like startups who value speed and agility, um, maybe don't work that way, but their speed and agility sometimes loses clarity in the rush. So I think both types of companies can struggle with alignment, just in different ways. And to me, the key is really to build communication practices that match the pace and the culture of that organization.
Oh, yeah.
So, again, broad strokes, law firms tend to be more hierarchical, more formal, but I know some law firms that are much more laid back and much more sort of flat structure. And again, it's going to depend on that culture.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What do you do if you're an employee of an existing structure, and they go out and they hire, an external hire who comes in, and they're tasked with the one of, okay, let's change the culture here. How do you help? How do you communicate in a way that's helpful? Sometimes we get territorial. We're like, oh, they didn't even consider me, and we kind of slow things down, like crazy at those moments.
I think that it's easy to get lost in the weeds when you're in it. And so
Mhm.
having that third party perspective always helps. I want to take a step back though. I like to define culture
Mm.
because too often I think that culture, right? People think culture is about these perks or like free pizza Fridays or mission statements and values on a wall, and or shared behaviors, right? But to me, if you think about science, when you culture something, you're creating conditions under which you want things to grow, right? To me, culture at a company is that same idea. You don't just say, this is our culture, you live it in how you behave and who gets promoted and how conflict is handled and how all of these things match what you're saying. And again, I always like to emphasize communication is not just about what you're saying, it's about what your employees are experiencing and how you are sort of walking that talk. And so, having someone come in from the outside to help change the culture, really, what happens is, as someone who helps from a communications perspective, I'm not coming in to tell you what your culture is. I'm coming in to explore what the scenario exist what is the scenario that currently exists. I'm there to ask questions and help take what you're already doing and put it in a place that's clear, understandable and calls out maybe pros and cons and recommendations for where there might be a mismatch between what leaders are saying and what employees are hearing. And so if you're someone at a company who feels like, well, why is this consultant here? Think about it more as, how can I leverage this person to help me get what I want done across, right? Because everyone plays a role in culture from the top down.
Yep.
Everyone plays a role in communication. And so it's really using your resources, of which sometimes that external party is a resource, to help advance whatever those values and strategies are that then become activities and actions that help drive the bottom line.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a level of maturity. It's a level of emotional intelligence, all those things
Of course.
to get to,
We've all been
to
there. Early career
absolutely.
days, I remember thinking that in similar scenarios. I was very fortunate to have a phenomenal boss when I started my career, and I've learned so much from her. I still do, I always think like, what would she do? But yeah, it's a level of maturity, and that's why as a leader, if you have someone on your team who's maybe more junior, is maybe more green in the role, that communication is important too, because then you can help guide them in how they should be acting when these things are being implemented.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Boy, I love that. What are some of the biggest ROI you've seen, from companies who've made the shift, who, utilize things like your 3H, who are actively trying to, be on the other side of some of those communication breakdowns?
So there's a number of metrics you can measure, and I don't think there's any one metric that really is the end all be all for measuring ROI. There's engagement, right? So if you are sending information and tracking engagement, ideally you're seeing engagement increase, right? So maybe emails weren't being opened before, but now they are, or whatever your email says that needs doing is now being done. So that's one thing you can look at. You can also just look at turnover. Usually, turnover tends to
Mm,
not be as intense, right? Because if people are aligned with what you're saying and are in agreement with what your culture is, they're going to stay. You will always lose people. That's just sort of the way of the world, but ideally, you're not going to be losing talent, right? Another thing is even just recruiting, right? Because recruiting is an extension of your culture. If you're telling people one thing and then they join and experience a completely different thing, that's an issue.
yep.
So if you and they talk, right? They go on Glassdoor, they go on whatever. Your website can say one thing, but ideally, I mean, I worked with a client that lost a lot of recruits because or candidates because they were like, oh well, we spoke to people and it wasn't working. And then lastly, I would also say productivity and performance, right? You know, if done right and if you're communicating effectively, it's going to make decision sorry, excuse me. It's going to make decision making faster.
Yep.
It's going to make productivity kind of be the thing that just speeds up. And by the way, I'm not big on saying, oh, well, you're so productive, let's give you more work. I'm simply saying if this is your goal and you're telling people to like row in that direction, they're going to get there faster than if you're like, well, we're sort of headed east and then they're kind of rowing in circles, right? So all of those things are important. And I think it's easy for leaders to forget that that drives the bottom line. So if you're doing internal communications well, your people are going to be engaged, they're going to be productive, and they're going
Yep.
to help get you to where you want to be. And now,
Yeah.
historically, one last thing I'll say is because I come from the professional services space, your people are your product. You need alignment that much more because people are hiring you as the person, they're hiring your service. So if you are expecting people to perform and offer, the best quality client experience, you need to define what that looks like. You can't be like, we are going to give excellent experience. You need to say, this is how it looks to clients. And now you're going to act on it that way. So it's important.
Wow. Wow. Absolutely. I mean, just incredible. What's a small change a leader could make, even after listening to this week, to begin aligning their messaging more with their culture? I mean, even to be thinking through those things.
Yeah, really, in my mind, I would say start tying your messages back to your values. So every
Mm.
time you write an email or give feedback or lead a meeting, link it back to things like, we're doing this because we believe in transparency, or this decision reflects our value of excellence, or whatever your values are, tie it back to that. So it kind of connects those dots and shows people you
Yep.
actually are trying to live those values. So it's a simple habit, but I think it really gets people to connect those dots between words and actions.
Well, I love that. I love that. This has been, whew, I mean, powerful. I've taken a couple pages of notes. Love this. We appreciate you just kind of sharing. And I know this is going to really help a ton of our listeners. Before I let you go, we're building this online library. All of our guests, we ask a couple of different questions, place for our listeners to go and just kind of get some new ideas. So when it comes to speakers, is there a speaker that you regularly hear that you're just like mind blown, can't wait to tell other people about? They check off all the boxes.
I am a huge, huge, huge fan of Brene Brown.
Ooh, yeah.
I think that she is really great at speaking.
And isn't her, is she attributed to the quote, clarity is kindness? Uh, just,
I think so. Actually, I'm not sure, but I've heard the quote.
I could just be
She's big
grabbing that
on
from anywhere. Yeah.
yeah. Dare to Lead is one of her books
Yep.
that I fell in love with. I'm gonna have to check on that. I think you're right, but I'm not sure,
Yeah.
so I
She's
don't want
amazing.
to say yes.
I love it. Uh, Not everybody is, but if you're a podcast listener, is there a podcast, either a guilty pleasure, a fun one, or is there a development one? Not that developing ourselves isn't fun, but either one, that you're like, oh, you've got to listen to this podcast.
I love Adam Grant's Work Life
Mm.
podcast. He's also phenomenal and has some great content that he produces.
It's
In
almost not fair
fact,
how good
one
it
of
is.
the I know. There's an episode I listened to, and it might have been on his Rethinking podcast because I know he has two, and sometimes the episodes overlap. But it was an interview with CEO of Airbnb, Brian Chesky, and he interviews him about when they did layoffs and how he communicated as a leader. And Chesky said something that has stuck with me to this day, which is your employees don't need to agree with you, but they need to trust you.
Oof.
And to me, that is key. And to me, I think
Wow.
it's core to anything you do with communication.
Yep. Oof. That's good. Lastly, you run into a friend. They're about to hop on a boat to go to a desert island. They can only bring one book. What's the book that you send them with?
Okay, I would say, oh God, there's so many. I would say I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right. The Anthropocene Reviewed. I'll have
Okay.
to send you the name. It's
Yeah.
by John Green. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Green brothers, but John Green has written The Fault in Our Stars, Turtles All the Way Down. He's a YA author. His brother, they're one of the original YouTube vloggers, and they have a ton of really cool programs. But The Anthropocene Reviewed is a phenomenal, in my opinion, phenomenal book. It is nonfiction, and I tend to be a fiction reader, but this book is short essays reviewing random things in today's world, and it's really cool.
Ah, I love it. I love it. Where's the best place we can send our listeners to find you online? They can get more information about you.
So they can visit my website, readycultures.com. In fact, they can, on my website, download the 3H framework I mentioned. It's a free worksheet they can download and use to practice how they communicate. So readycultures.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on there pretty frequently and trying to share thoughts
I love
about
it.
internal comms.
I love it. And we'll make sure we'll put that in the show notes. We'll link it in our Facebook group and our email. This was amazing. Thank you so much. Appreciate you just being so generous with your wisdom, the stuff that you're learning. And we just so appreciate it.
I love this. This is great. I'm all about speaking with people, so this has been lovely. I look forward to hearing it.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Speak with People podcast. It means the world to us when you share this episode. Thanks for liking, subscribing, or following the podcast. That really does help the podcast get into more ears and into more leaders listening. Also, don't forget, we have 2 exciting resources for you. The first is go to Facebook and join the Speakers Group. This is a community designed for leaders who want to grow their communication skills. Also, go to speakwithpeople.com/skills library to access the Communication Skills Library. It is an online resource chock filled with resources that will inspire you and transform you and grow your communication skills. Thanks again for being a part of the listening community. We cannot wait for the next episode.